Welcome to the 24th Annual Northwest Public Employee Diversity Conference. For those of you that were able to join us this morning, welcome back. My name's Tami Cockeram. I'm with the City of Hillsborough, one of this year's co-chairs, along with Mr. Percy Winters Jr. from Multnomah County. I want to take a second to introduce those that are up here on the dais with me. To my left is our keynote speaker of this year, Mr. Simon Tam. Art Hendricks, who will be accepting the award for this year's recipient of the Robert Phillips Regional Diversity Award on my left. We also have our very own Mr. Robert Phillips, the founder of this conference 24 years ago and retired affirmative action officer for Multnomah County, who will be presenting the award. And then Daniel Garcia, our award committee member from Multnomah County. Now at this time, I'm going to turn the podium over to Daniel Garcia, who's the award committee member for the Robert Phillips Diversity Award.
Thank you, Tami. Good morning. I've had the pleasure of serving this year on the Robert Phillips Award Committee. The great and beautiful thing about being on the committee is that we get to hear about all the wonderful work and all the wonderful people that are working within all of our jurisdictions. And it's an honor to recognize all that. It's just amazing. With that in mind, and in response to a nomination that we received, we would like to take this time to honor and acknowledge the impacts of a tragic event that took place earlier this year. And it shook all of our communities to the core. On May 26, a man on a MAX train targeted two brave young women of color, Destiny Mangum and her anonymous friend. They were verbally assaulted and threatened. Three bystanders, Micah Fletcher, Taliesin Metch, and fellow public servant Rick Best, stepped up in that moment to do what was right and true to their values. Taliesin and Rick died living those values. They could have done nothing, but they didn't. Their automatic response was in the service of those around them, thinking of others first rather than their own safety and comfort. To Taliesin Metch, we honor your sacrifice. We honor you. To Micah Fletcher, thank you for standing with them. We honor you. To Destiny Mangum and her friend, thank you for your courageous persistence and bravery. You both have every right to be where you are. We honor both of you. As a community of public servants gathered here today, we especially want to honor Rick Best, who worked with the City of Portland's Bureau of Development Services. He was well loved by his family and friends and coworkers. To honor Rick and all that he meant to us, we would like to take this moment and reflect in silence. Please let us bow our heads. Thank you very much. Now we're on to the Robert Phillips Award. Every year, the Northwest Public Employees Diversity Conference solicits nominations from the sponsoring jurisdictions to honor an employee, a work group, a team, or department that has demonstrated a respect and commitment to diversity that goes beyond just the day-to-day duties. This award is named after Robert Phillips, one of the founders of this conference, and it embraces the spirit by which Mr. Phillips poured out so much for the cause of creating a more inclusive diverse, and equitable workplace in the region. To the nominators, we thank you for your recognition of the contribution of your coworkers, employees, and to the nominees, we thank you those who were not chosen this year. We thank you for your contributions. They were all outstanding, and we are all better for that. We would like to honor those nominees now by reading their names, and please hold your applause until the end. Huitzi Rios Martinez, the City of Portland. Alfredo Gonzalez, the City of Portland. Diane Avery, City of Portland. Jocelyn Baker, Multnomah County. Irma Jimenez, Multnomah County. Dion Jordan, Multnomah County. Allison Dumas, Metro. Harold Rains, Clark County. Kimberly Branham, Prosper, Portland. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Robert Phillips, who will present the award to this year's recipient. Robert Phillips is a former Multnomah County affirmative action officer who has worked in the area of equal employment opportunity for over 25 years and has a long history of involvement in the civil rights field. As director of Multnomah County's Affirmative Action Office, Robert was responsible for the development of policies, initiatives, plans, and programs that promoted a respectful work environment for diverse employees and assisted the organization in meeting its equal employment opportunity and affirmative action obligations. Robert also served as a commissioner for the Port of Portland Civil Service Commission, and his community service includes appointments to the Nike Corporation's Minority Affairs Advisory Board, gubernatorial appointments to the State Commission on Black Affairs, and service on the Oregon State Bar Affirmative Action Committee. In addition, Robert was a recipient of the 2009 Arthur Fleming Award by the Multnomah County Managers of Color, among many other awards. The Multnomah County Board of Commissioners proclaimed February 28, 2012 as Robert Phillips Appreciation Day in Multnomah County, Oregon. In retirement from Multnomah County, Robert is still rocking. He has an encore career during which he has served as a member of the Northwest Renal Patients Advisory Board, the Oregon Assembly for Black Affairs Political Convention Planning Committee, and the Port of Portland Fire Department Civil Service Board. Please put your hands together for the one, the only, Mr. Robert Phillips.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. To the people on the dais, the two co-chairs, Tami Cockeram and my son, Percy Winters. I thank you for another great year of a diversity conference. It didn't have to happen, but it did because of your determination, integrity, commitment to making a difference in the lives of each of the governments from which you serve. The late Dr. Martin Luther King reminded us in his last speech, we have difficult days ahead. I might not get there with you, but I know we as a people will get to the mountaintop. Little actions make big differences. And each of your presence here today constitute those actions which will make a difference. Before I start in recognizing the recipient of this year's award, I know there's a couple of people here who were past recipients, Donnie Adair and some other ones. Could you just stand for a moment and get acknowledged? Donnie's retired, but he also continues to do great work for governmental organizations through his business, helping the city of Portland and others write affirmative action plans and deal with cultural diversity issues. And so we really appreciate all of the great and wonderful things that you do, Donnie, to make a difference and continue to do. Courageous and inclusive are two very powerful words that both speak to and beat at the heart of this conference. Having the courage to stand up, speak out, and take action in the name of inclusion for the sake of letting others know that they and you matter, that you have the right to be here, to be with us, that you are one of us, no matter what box you feel forced into or whatever anyone else says. Our award recipient truly embodies this year's theme of courageous inclusion in so many ways that we could spend the rest of this luncheon talking about how, for nearly 2 decades, he grew up in a refugee camp in Nepal, after his family was expelled from the kingdom of Bharatam under their one nation, one people policy. That intentional, systemic, and institutional act of exclusion did have a silver lining. It led to a university in Kathmandu and then here in Portland in 2008 as part of the U.S. Refugee Resettlement Program. Since then, he assisted new refugee families from Asia, Africa, and the Middle East and Eastern Europe transition into Portland neighborhoods, schools, and communities. Born from that work was a model of how to successfully integrate into our communities new immigrants still living with the wounds of war and displacement, a model now being replicated as a best practice across the United States. And this is just one of his off-time activities. As the Parks for New Portlanders engagement coordinator for the city of Portland, we could talk about the list of past accomplishments that include the Spirit of Portland Award for Innovative City Leaders, a 2-time recipient of the Portland Immigrant of the Year Award, and the New Portlanders Award by the Portland City Council. Most recently, he received the Parks Champion Award from the National Recreation and Park Association. Our recipient devotion to making others feel included and at home is only rivaled by his devotion as a father and husband. His presence is missing here today. I was told he had twins, and so he wanted to be with the family. By his devotion, is missing here today, but he is currently doing what he should be doing, being with his brand new twins and supporting his wife and family during this extra joyous time. Without further ado, I am pleased and feel honored to present the 2017 Robert Phillips Award to recipient Sung Sabati. Accepting for Sung is one of his co-managers or co-workers, Art Henderson. Is Art is here, please come forward to receive the award.
I'd like to just say a few words. Sam Subedi, I want to thank the committee, the Northwest Diversity Committee, for selecting Sam, and I also would like to thank Robert Phillips for his long, dedicated service to equal opportunity and to diversity and inclusion. And I can't think of a better person who exemplifies Robert's long career than Sam. And for those of you who have not had the opportunity to meet Sam, you're missing out. He is absolutely a wonderful human being. And as Robert outlined his experience coming to this country, if Sam were here, he would say, I arrived here with $10 in my pocket and a plastic bag, and within 3 years, I was able to buy a house by sleeping less hours and working to learn as much as I can about the country that he was in, and that he bought a red Mustang, because a red Mustang exemplifies what it's like to be American. But that only tells a part of the spirit of Sam, of which myself and other members of the Parks Equity and Inclusion team, Carolyn Kwan Lee, Kenya Williams, Lorraine Wilson, have the benefit to work with this gentleman on a day-to-day basis, along with the other folks in the city of Portland. Sam has, in his short time within Parks, really begun to transform us, both in our organization, but also to ignite our spirit in terms of what it truly means to be thankful, but also what it means to be a public servant. And in the short time, he has created the Youth Ambassador Program, Portland World Cup, and for those of you who've had the opportunity, nobody throws a party like a Sam party. You know, on March 17th, St. Patrick's Day, he organized Portlanders Stand with Refugee and Immigrants to counter the negative messages that we're receiving at a federal level about the value of immigrants and the unfortunate destructive Islamophobia that we hear. And Sam, this summer, also organized Portlanders Walk with Refugee and Immigrants with almost 2,000 people in attendance. So I cannot tell you enough how much this man, in my 18 years of public service, inspires me to be a better person, and more importantly, brings the love and the value of what it means to be a public servant to all City of Portlanders. This is a guy who will show up at homeless shelters to provide clothing on his own time, as well as raising 3 kids. So I want to thank the committee. I want to thank Robert Phillips for leading the way, and I will be more than glad to give this to Sam tomorrow. Thank you.
Well, now it's that time of the agenda where I have the honor of introducing this year's keynote speaker, Simon Tam. And Simon's bio is in the brochure, and I would encourage all of you to read it. But what I'm going to do is highlight just some of the things that are in his bio, starting with my favorite, which is Simon is a self-proclaimed troublemaker. And our conference coordinator would confirm that. As we were all waiting for Simon. Where's Simon? Where's Simon? Where's Simon? He appeared on the TEDx stage for a total of 12 times. Simon is the founder and bassist of The Slants. It's a rock group, if you haven't heard it. Some of you have. He was called the champion of diverse issues by the White House and worked with President Barack Obama on the campaign to fight bullying. Simon recently helped expand freedom of speech through winning a unanimous victory at the Supreme Court of the United States for a landmark case in constitutional and trademark law. That's not easy. Forbes says his resume is a paragon of completeness. He was recognized as a freedom fighter by the Roosevelt Rough Riders. And Simon just returned from New Zealand on a surprise trip that he took his new wife on. So please help me welcome Simon Tam.
Well, thank you so much for having me and for taking the time to listen and for being here. As mentioned, I guess I was involved with a certain Supreme Court case over intellectual property rights law. But as somebody who's been a part of that over the past 8 years, I've run into a lot of other interesting stories about intellectual property law that would normally put people to sleep, but I think has valuable lessons for us here today. And so one of those lessons that I wanted to share came from an idea called paper towns. It's an old bit of copyright law and refers to the fake places on the map that cartographers would put. So back in the day when people were making maps, and before they had Google Maps or anything like that, they would put a fake place somewhere on the map. That way, if somebody else, another map maker, published a map and it had their fake place, they would know their work was stolen from them. Also called a copyright trap. So in 1938, the General Drafting Company published a map of upstate New York. And on it, at the foothill of the Catskill Mountains, at the intersection of two dirt roads, they placed a little town called Agloe. Now, Agloe was just an anagram of the two guys' names. It didn't really mean a whole lot. And nothing really happened until a couple decades later when Rand McNally publishes their map of upstate New York. And there, on their map, at the same intersection at the foothill of the Catskill Mountains, was a town called Agloe. Now, the smaller guys were excited. They called Rand McNally up and said, "Hey, we caught you. That's a paper town. We're going to sue you." And of course, Rand McNally says, "No, it's totally a real place. We would never put a fake place on one of our maps." And so to resolve this, they decide to drive out there. They go all the way out to this little intersection. And there, they found a town called Agloe. You see, people kept driving to this intersection, expecting there to be a town. One day, some guy just decided to build it. And he decided to call it Agloe because that was what was on his map. Now, I think this is a really interesting story for a number of reasons, but one of which lies with the assumptions that we have about our world. You see, it's so easy to assume that the maps you have are shaped by the world around you. But a much more fascinating concept is to think how you can literally shape your world by changing the process in which you map it. The guidelines that we have set, the ideas we hold about diversity, equity, inclusion, shouldn't be shaped by the limits that we have in our society or what we think is possible. They should be shaped by our dreams and our desires, our values for a better world. And a lot of that comes with changing the process, changing our mentality, changing our perspective of how we approach systems. On February 26, 2015, there was a major conflict that took over the news cycle. Some of you might remember this. People around the world started weighing in and taking sides over these issues with very heated exchanges, many of them leading to broken relationships and, in some cases, even death threats. In less than 7 days, nearly 10 million tweets were shared about this. Now, this wasn't a divide that was fueled by partisanship. There was no attack from a terrorist group. It was not a controversial tweet from Donald Trump, who had yet to announce his presidential aspirations yet. No, this, in fact, was about the dress. The dress was a viral internet photo that had people disagreeing whether this little article of clothing is either black and blue or white and gold. In less than 24 hours, the dress broke BuzzFeed's record for the most number of concurrent users. In one day, it received over 32.8 million unique views. Think about it, that's more than either Democrats or Republicans had participating in the respective primaries. Now, as somebody who studies online culture, I actually don't care that much about the impressions, or the number of people that see something. What I really care about, what really interests me, is the engagement factor, the interactions that people have with each other, and more importantly, how those interactions ultimately drive behavior. Now, this isn't saying, if you study the internet, that every comment you'll find online is thought-provoking or interesting. But then again, neither is every remark made at a party, a town hall, or a place of worship either. We know that sometimes comments can vary very drastically from being genuinely funny or weird to being completely inappropriate. So when I see people sharing an article or video with this caveat, don't read the comment section, I actually get really curious. Because I know the kind of statement they're making isn't referring to those awkward and hilarious comments that are out there. What they're actually talking about are opinions that they disagree with, presented in a way that they disagree with, perhaps an offensive or emotional kind of way. But contrary to popular internet advice out there, I believe it's important to read the comment section because it is important to connect with those of opposing beliefs. Behind those messages of hate, there's actually a story of pain. If we constantly feel like we have to block and unfriend everybody we disagree with simply to have a more comfortable existence for ourselves, we'll only continue to isolate ourselves from other people's realities, their experiences, and their perspectives. This is my steadfast belief. Apathy is not compatible with love. Ignorance is not fuel for compassion. We're living in one of the most divided eras in our nation's history. A 2016 Pew Research Center poll found that 41% of Democrats believe the Republican Party to be a serious threat to the nation. On the other side, 45% of Republicans felt that Democrats are so misguided they actually threaten our country's well-being. Perspectives about racism and police brutality in the U.S. are heavily divided along racial lines. Tension between people of different beliefs seems to be getting worse. And of course, a lot of this divide is experienced and it's articulated in the kind of online comments section of news stories and social media feeds. And this is despite the fact that most news and search engine results are actually tailored for individual users through a phenomenon called filter bubbles. In other words, the content that you see online is catered to your perspective so that major world news, events, information will be skewed to your personal bias. But that's actually created even more division because views become more extreme rather than balanced, nuanced, or informed. And because of this, people start blaming the internet itself. In other words, they see technology as the problem. They blame it on Facebook, they blame it on Twitter, and the media itself sometimes, so they decide to disengage altogether or only retreat into clearly biased sources that reconfirm existing beliefs. Yet there are a few other people who believe that technology is the solution, that it'll somehow save us. For example, there's a common belief that it's the anonymous nature of the internet and of social media that makes people more aggressive. That's why Google made all YouTube comments tied to individual accounts of users now. But a 2016 study from the University of South Australia found that non-anonymous users are actually far more aggressive than anonymous ones. Another approach is, hey, let's just delete the comments section altogether. Major news sites like the Washington Post, NPR, USA Today, all shut off the comments section altogether, thinking it would solve these problems. Some companies are giving it another shot with a few modifications. There's a site called The Verge. They actually select and comments and edit them for length, treating them kind of like a giant letters to the editor section. Norway has a site called NRK that actually makes you take a short quiz about the article you just read before you're allowed to leave a comment. You know, their hope is that it'll make you more informed about those discussions. Now, will any of this work? I don't know. But I think that the change needs to be deeper than just the technical aspect. Rather than thinking about technology as a tool, maybe we should think of it more as a symbol. How does it represent society? I oftentimes like to think of social media as the world's biggest cocktail party, and obviously some people have had way too much to drink. But like any party, if you change the dynamics of the party, it doesn't actually change the people involved. We need to develop a new protocol, one that's rooted in compassion and empathy. And if we're to be honest, we actually need to begin with ourselves. This is an opportunity to practice patience, to be instantly connected with a variety of perspectives. Many of us assume that Americans are divided by our values. You know, we have right versus left, conservative versus liberal, urban versus rural. But the reality is that we don't have different values. We simply have different interpretations and experience a different emphasis of the values that we already share as a country. But how can you learn that if you don't see or hear about other experiences, even if they're shared in a fashion that you feel is distasteful? There's so many positives of having a robust conversation, even when the comments can get hurtful or when it gets a little uncomfortable, because it allows you to get a litmus test on how people are feeling. You get to find out instantly, am I credible? The best way to test your own values is finding out how you can articulate them in a way that connects you with other people. But shutting other people down doesn't do anything to advance justice. We know the cure for bad speech isn't censorship. It's more speech. It's better speech. Speech that is nuanced and one that speaks to others' values. Because we need a new standard. I mean, the standard for progress shouldn't be if you win a debate or an argument, but rather if you're able to find new ways of developing compassion in the face of opposition. Now, I'm not saying you need to spend every waking moment dealing with outrageous online comments, but you should be able to ask yourself, am I willing to lose valued relationships over a disagreement? Does ignoring other people actually build better communities? I've heard a lot of people say to me over the years, why bother? There was always going to be bullying. There's always going to be racism and sexism. There's always going to be people who don't care about others' values. But that's not the point, isn't it? It's just as much about the ends as it is the means. We need to renounce cynicism as the primary vehicle for change in our world. Remember, apathy is not compatible with love. Ignorance is not fuel for compassion. You can begin by having an uncomfortable conversation different with you with a new kind of goal. Rather than arguing to win, you argue to win over hearts. And that comes by listening. It isn't your intellect, your education, or your persuasiveness that will change others. It's your capacity to love. A few years ago, my band was invited to play at the Oregon State Penitentiary. Now, to a lot of people, the idea of sending an all-Asian American dance rock band into a prison with a significant population of neo-Nazis is kind of a bad idea. Now, it wasn't something that really crossed my mind, even as I was signing away waivers saying we would not sue if we were stabbed, shanked, maimed, killed. I was like, you got to sign that stuff just to go into a high school these days. I mean, come on. It only started crossing my mind as we were going through our second set of security procedures, as we were going through these metal detectors and handing over all our IDs. You see, they handed us these bright orange neoprene vests, like the kind you play flag football with, the kind that had not been washed in some time. At this point, one of my band members says, hey, we wear suits and vests and things when we play. It's July, it's really hot out. Is it okay if we take these like safety vests off? And the guard looks at us and he says, sure. But if something happens out there, those vests let us know who not to shoot. I was like, yo, can I get 2 of them vests? I don't want to lose mine. Like that seems like a bad idea. And as we start walking through the prison, I start getting filled with anxiety. I start getting filled with a sense of dread because I'd never been to prison before. The only things I knew about prison came from books, TV, film. There weren't a lot of good things to say. I started thinking, wait, who gets sent to a maximum security prison? The worst of the worst, drug dealers, rapists, murderers. What's it gonna be like out there? Did I just sign my band up for something really stupid? But finally, we get out there, and it's a place that they nicknamed the Big Yard. It's a huge field that's open. It's completely surrounded by these 30-foot-high walls of sentry towers with searchlights and weapons. And at the end of all this was a small concrete stage, a little bit bigger than the size of this one. And the only thing separating us from nearly 2,000 inmates were these bright orange safety cones and a thin line of yellow tape that said, "Police, do not cross." Of course, I talked to the guard and I said, "Excuse me, I don't know if they follow these kinds of instructions. I mean, that's why they're here, right? They can't follow instructions." And he says, "No, don't worry, we got a plan." Of course, his plan entailed if something happens, drop everything and run behind you. If you make it through the other side, we'll secure you. And of course, I was like, this sounds like something from The Walking Dead, not like a federal institution. But he said, "Yeah, we'll be all right." And finally, we began playing, and something extraordinary happens every time we play. Every time we share our art with people, it's an amazing experience because we forget about who we are. We forget about who's in front of us. We're just there sharing our art, our message with other folks. And a small group kind of gathers in front while a large one walks around because it's their only outdoor time they have all day. But when we launched into our cover of Painted Black by the Rolling Stones, people ran up, they started jumping up and down and cheering. It was incredible. Our short little 45-minute performance turned into like a 2-hour musical marathon. Now, at the end of this concert, I'm standing by one of those orange safety cones on the safe side, of course. And as I'm waiting, and people are doing different things, I notice a small group of large, shirtless white men start walking up towards us. And they're covered head to toe in tattoos, but I didn't have my glasses on, no contacts, so I couldn't tell what was going on until they get closer and the words appear before my face. Emblazoned across the guy's chest are the words, "White Power." And the thing that was like, I thought a bumblebee or something like that is actually a swastika on another man's face. And then, of course, I start getting filled with that anxiety again. Start getting filled with that dread. What's going to happen? I look over to my band, and they're breaking down equipment about 20, 30 feet away from me. I look over at our guard. He's breaking up a different argument like 50 feet away. I turn back around, and they're right in front of me. Now, the man in front walks up, and he seems a bit anxious himself. He hands me a piece of paper and a sharpened pencil. And then he asks me for an autograph. Now, the only thing going through my mind at this moment is that scene in Jurassic Park where they're like, if you don't move, the T-Rex won't see you. I thought, maybe it'll work here. It didn't work. But then he says, it's for my daughter. I want to tell her that I'm at the band. Will you sign it? I'm like, of course I'm going to sign this. And so I started signing it and just having a normal conversation with him, asking him a lot of questions, mostly those about his daughter, avoiding questions like, why are you in here? I could kind of figure that out. And as we talk for like just a few moments, he tells me, he says, hey, I know I got these tattoos. I know what you must be thinking, but I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, and they're ones that I don't want my little girl to make. He wanted to show me that he could learn, that he could change what was in his heart and in his mind, even if he couldn't change what was stained into his skin. It was one of the most powerful experiences of my life. I mean, I went in with all kinds of assumptions and stereotypes in my mind. I was thinking we're just there to play music, we're just hired, maybe we'll talk to some inmates. But when we actually talked to them as people, instead of ideologies to fight against, we all left changed that day. So whether it's a best friend, a coworker, or a stranger who seems to represent everything that you stand against, we need to learn how to ask those kinds of questions before making assumptions. You'll be transformed into a better, more compassionate person. Take that extra time to ask questions and care enough to listen. That's how you change that map-making process in our world. I recently had another chance to change my maps. As mentioned, I took my wife for a surprise trip to New Zealand. I was in Australia and New Zealand for the past 2 weeks. In fact, I just got back less than 40 hours ago. But right beforehand, it was also an opportunity to leave my house vacant so I could try and sell it in the crazy Portland market. In fact, a few hours before I got on my flight, I sold my tour bus, I met with a realtor, and I had to do all kinds of final preparations to stage the house before I left for PDX. Do you ever notice how most people are the most productive right before they take a big vacation? I mean, that's when the to-do list is brought out and major projects at work that need to be wrapped up or looked at, the mail's put on hold, you have to make decisions on what to pack and so on. As that trip gets closer, things are prioritized so that the most important tasks get the most energy and attention for you. After all, once that plane takes off, there's no chance to go back and get some of those things done. Well, that's just how most of us operate. The more aware we are of our limits or our deadlines, the bigger the urge to be productive, to focus on the things that really matter so we aren't left with any kind of regrets. As a musician, I'm often faced with a similar kind of dilemma. Whenever we create a song or an album, it's easy to get carried away with adding more harmonies, more instruments or ideas. But really, it's a best practice to cut away at the inessential so you could allow the main melody to flourish and allow the song to breathe. In addition to having a limited amount of time, like how long the song should be, there's also limited a number of notes that we have and a frequency bandwidth, or the capacity of the human ear to distinguish sounds. You see, we're surrounded by limits and deadlines, from the number of minutes in an hour to the number of characters that Twitter will allow you to post. Changed recently for some people. And of course, there's the unknowable limit of the length of our own life. So, why do we treat life as if it were being measured by a stopwatch? A race to see who gets the most? What if we instead approached it as a countdown? Think about it. Limits actually unlock our creativity. While we don't know when our lives will end, we know that one day they will. And of course, we can always say that there's going to be a limited number of breaths that you'll be able to take, of songs you'll be able to listen to or download, but most importantly, the limit to the number of words that we share. Putting it another way, your life has a word count limit. Like creating a song or carving out a sculpture from a marble slab, we should cut away the inessential so that the truly beautiful and lovely can remain. In other words, you should live a life that is worth telling. What would the Star-Spangled Banner be without its words? Well, it would actually be the official song of an 18th century gentleman's club of amateur musicians in London. What would any major religion be without its sacred text? Words embody the values. They give the purpose, meaning, and direction. Our lives should be filled with the chosen words that do the same. Have you ever known someone who spent money carelessly as if it were limitless? Have you ever seen a student, maybe some of you have kids, that are dawdling near their final semester, wasting time because even though finals are approaching, they seem further away than they actually are? And if you want to see endless examples of people who don't value their time or their words, simply look at the comment section that we talked about when we first began this conversation. If you want to change the world, you need to begin by first changing your words. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me is a lie. It's one that we tell ourselves so often we'd swear that it was actually true. But if you look at every case of bullying, it's not the sticks or the stones that drove countless young adults to suicide each year. It's the words. A few years ago, I was asked to write a piece for a site called Inspire Me Today. They gave me a simple prompt and a word count limit of 500 words, which I was struggling with. Everything that I thought of was just way too long to fit in their parameters. And then it finally hit me. What I needed to do was really examine the worth of every word. This is what I wrote, and I'd like to close today's message by sharing it with you today. If I could share 500 words to inspire, this is the important wisdom I'd pass along to others. Make every word count. I once heard that language is the primary moral choice in our life. The words that we choose can build communities, reunite loved ones, and inspire others. They could be a catalyst for change. However, our words also have the power to destroy and divide. They could start a war, reduce a lifelong relationship to a collection of memories, or end a life. If there's anything in life worthy of consideration, it should be the way that we use our words. In nearly every creation story, life begins from words. In every civilization, it's been the storytellers, the oracles, the writers, and the masters of language that have ruled. It's often said to live every day as if it were the last. The words you use should be considered with equal weight. If your life could only be judged by your words, how would you be remembered? Would your good intentions be overshadowed by negativity, gossip, sarcasm, and bitterness? Or would your words be remembered as inspirational, loving, full of hope, and treasured by the community around you? Your life becomes better only when you become better. Begin with the words that you choose to shape the world around you. Everything that we know and believe in this life depends on the context of the words that we allow into our lives and the words that we share with others. With only a single life to live, there's no excuse to waste time by creating more negativity and dejection in our world. So, let's truly renounce cynicism as that primary vehicle for change in the world. If you only had a limited number of words to share with others, what would you say? If you were only going to be remembered by your final words, what would you say? Say it. Beginning right now, make every word count, and let's change the maps of our world together. Thank you.